If you're from another planet or simply live without paying much attention to anything around you, you might want to ask, are we really lonely? Yes, we actually are. For example, here are the statistics for European countries. In the top 10 loneliest countries, Finland ranks first, where single-person households already make up essentially 50%. In 10th place is Bulgaria with 38%. The average across Europe is 35%. In Russia, according to statistics for 2026, it is 42%. In the United States, 38%. In East Asia, the range is already broader, 15 to 40%. And according to WHO data, every sixth person on the planet regularly feels lonely. Overall, the trend is absolutely real. Today we'll take a detailed look at why this is happening. This episode is closely connected to the previous one, about why we're dying out. If you haven't watched it, make sure to do so and then come back. Everything will be much clearer and more comprehensive that way. Subscribe everywhere, and let's begin. For most of our history, we lived in relatively small and stable communities. First, these were tribes, then villages, and later something resembling a city. In such an environment, a person from birth was woven into a multitude of social ties. Every day they interacted with relatives, neighbours, acquaintances, members of a religious community, merchants, family friends, and people they had known since childhood. Something like social isolation was an incredibly rare phenomenon, because under those conditions it was almost impossible to separate oneself from the collective. In practice, there were only three ways to end up in social isolation. Either you figured everything out about this life and went off to live in the forest, or you contracted a terrible disease, and now everyone is afraid of you. Or people are afraid of you because you are unstable and pose a threat to society. With the growth of cities, everything changes radically. If in a village a person was automatically integrated into the collective, in a megapolis, this no longer exists. Now social connections have to be sought out, built, and maintained through very deliberate effort. But this is only the beginning, because the process of urbanization has at least three more extremely important aspects. First, the city destroys, so to speak, the natural mechanisms through which relationships are formed. In traditional society, friendships, acquaintances, and marriages often emerge from constant repeated contact within the same group. The same people encountered the same people in the same places, at work, in religious life, during celebrations, or sitting on a bench outside. The urban environment is highly fragmented. A person lives in one district, works in another, and relaxes in a third, which makes the formation of stable local communities impossible. Second, urbanization is closely connected to the growth of social anonymity. In traditional society, a person's reputation carried enormous importance because everyone knew each other. In a large city, a person becomes practically invisible. This increases personal freedom. One can change their lifestyle, social circle, profession, and social role. But at the same time, the sense of rootedness and belonging disappears. Third, the pace of life accelerates in the city. A large city is a fairly aggressive environment, with a high level of competition that demands a certain speed of decision-making. Because of this, social connections begin to follow the logic of efficiency. Many people perceive other people from an instrumental perspective. In practice, this manifests in thoughts such as, is this conversation worth my time? Or, will contact with this person be useful to me or not? And so on. Communication increasingly becomes secondary to work and leisure. Obviously, nothing like this existed in the past. This creates a paradoxical situation. On the one hand, a person is constantly surrounded by huge numbers of people. On the other hand, most contacts are superficial, short-term, and functional in nature. Every day a person sees tens of thousands of faces, yet has virtually no stable emotional connections with anyone. As mentioned above, today we are witnessing the rapid growth of single-person households. Before this, the nuclear family, meaning a mother, a father, and their children, was dominant. However, if we look historically, and that is the only way to understand anything, then for almost all of human history the primary social unit was the extended family. A person lived within permanent intergenerational ties. This included parents, children, grandparents, uncles, aunts, relatives by marriage, cousins, and siblings. Often several generations lived together or near one another. Even if physically they were not under the same roof, they were still embedded within a single social space. This is enormously important. The extended family guaranteed constant communication, a sense of belonging, and a shared everyday life. Even if the family was not entirely healthy or functional, everyone still had a feeling of being included in relationships. In the 19th century, the extended family began to actively disintegrate, and in the 20th century, this process only intensified. People moved to cities either alone or with a spouse, and in doing so disconnected themselves from the local community, severing many social ties. Think of those relatives from somewhere obscure whom, for some reason, you're expected to talk to on the phone, even though you really do not want to. These are all echoes from the past, from the extended family. Those people still live more or less the way people used to live, and for them this is normal, whereas for you, as a purely urban resident, it no longer is. To you, these people register as strangers. To them, you register as family, which creates, if not a conflict, then at the very least a noticeable awkwardness. For modern people, this is fairly difficult to imagine, but individualism as a phenomenon of social and political life has existed for about 200, maybe 250 years. Before that, everything was different. In traditional society, a person was embedded within a rigid system of social roles and expectations. A person was born into a particular structure, religious, class-based, professional, communal, and so on, and a significant part of their life was by default predetermined by that structure, which clearly dictated what a person was allowed to do and what was forbidden, what kind of work they were supposed to do, and whether they were supposed to work at all, whom they were supposed to marry, and so forth. Our beloved self with a capital S, in short, simply never existed. In the 21st century, everything is different, because now each of us is a unique, free individual whom nobody can command. At first glance, this may seem like there is nothing wrong with it, merely an expansion of freedom. But we are here precisely so as not to limit ourselves to the first glance alone. We take a second one. Along with uniqueness and freedom comes responsibility for one's own life. If archaic structures no longer determine my fate, then there is nobody left besides me. My life is an individual project, and I, by the way, have many preferences that absolutely must be taken into account. As a result, social ties cease to be something given and instead begin to be evaluated in terms of personal benefit, emotional comfort, and alignment with expectations. Because of this, friendships, romantic relationships, marriage, and even relationships with relatives become far more conditional and temporary. A person has the right to end any relationship if it no longer corresponds to their needs or goals, do they not? Social ties become the subject of constant choice, which reduces their stability and depth. For most of history, the economy was explicitly collective in nature. The family was simultaneously both an economic unit and a social one. Relatives, neighbours, and the local community were important both emotionally and practically. For labour, raising children, caring for the elderly, running a household, and simply surviving. In the modern economy, the unit is increasingly the individual person, and this fundamentally changes the structure of social ties. Whereas in the past, it was almost impossible to exist normally outside a collective, today most tasks, if not all of them, can be handled in a completely autonomous mode. A person can live, work, and consume alone without entering into any relationships with those around them. In the past, marriage, family, and collective living arrangements were not only biological and emotional phenomena, but also economic necessities. People easily came together and continued living together, even if they did not particularly like one another, because surviving alone was impossible. Today, an increasing number of people have economic independence, which weakens the desire to meet people and live with someone. To this we can add constant job changes as the norm, enormous competition, and the cult of productivity, where you are expected to constantly develop yourself and always be occupied with something. Otherwise, you are already degrading, and if you are degrading, then you are losing to those who are developing themselves. Obviously, friends, family, and partners fit poorly into this logic, and at best are pushed into the background. Religion has several functions. One of them is integrative, because people were incorporated into collective life partly through religion. Traditional religious societies created a regular, recurring, and institutionalized form of interaction. People constantly encountered one another through religious services, holidays, ceremonies, rituals, and the everyday life of the community, where distinctions between generations, professions, and social classes were to a large extent erased. Importantly, these were not random contacts, but stable and long-term relationships embedded in the very structure of society. Because of this, a person acquired a stable identity, a system of norms and values, and a sense of belonging. As the role of religion in society weakens, all of this disappears. We no longer gather in church every Sunday, no longer celebrate important religious dates, and no longer belong to a local community, thereby losing the potential social ties that could have been formed there. An existential dimension should also be added here, because religion also gave people answers to the main questions of their lives. Now it does not. Nobody believes in heavenly fathers and mothers anymore, and because of this, the loneliness that already exists only intensifies. By the way, lost meanings, or meanings that are not yet visible at all, can be found through coaching. It is ideally suited for that. If you feel that everything has become somewhat tangled, a session can help untangle it. This does not necessarily have to concern the meaning of life. Perhaps you want to start your own business or scale up an existing one. It seems like you already have everything required for this, yet something is preventing you from moving forward. Perhaps you feel that it is time to change something, but you do not understand what exactly. Perhaps you cannot bring yourself to have a very important conversation, but you do not know why. Doubts and confusion can arise for many reasons. If you are in such a situation, and you know with complete certainty that you are, then come and we will figure it out. But for now, let us continue with our causes. As we already noted in the episode about why we're dying out today, people marry much later than they used to. This is connected to the same causes: the modern urban environment, focus on work and career, the declining role of tradition, and so on. Naturally, this also affects the problem of loneliness. Marrying later means that for a significant portion of life, often until 30, sometimes even until 40, a person lives without a permanent partner with whom they could share everyday life, as well as all the sorrows and joys of existence. On the one hand, the person is no longer a child, may have complete professional fulfillment and financial independence, but on the other hand, they do not have a family, which is perhaps what brings the strongest sense of belonging and connection to another human being. But this too is only the beginning. In addition to this, first, relationships are becoming increasingly unstable. The number of divorces, short-term relationships, and people who regularly enter and exit romantic relationships is growing. This creates a more fragmented social life. Instead of one long-term and stable bond, a person increasingly experiences a sequence of temporary relationships that seem, and of course are, rather superficial. For example, how many divorces do you think there are per 10 marriages in Russia? According to data for 2024, 8. That means if you're relatively young, say under 50, and marry someone, then statistically the probability that you will divorce is 80%. In other countries, the situation is only slightly better. The United States, China, and South Korea are at approximately 45%, Japan at 35%, and Europe at 35 to 50%. The main causes are right in front of you. They are universal: financial instability, infidelity, misunderstanding, domestic problems, and so on. From country to country, only the relative importance of each factor changes. Second, late marriages mean that people spend more time living in an autonomous mode, and of course one becomes accustomed to that. If you live alone for years, then a certain degree of independence and freedom comes to be perceived as something unconditional. Another person always means compromises and, quite unexpectedly, simply a living being that rustles, smells, breathes heavily, and so on, and again, you are simply not used to this. Previously, none of this existed and everything was fine. Now it has appeared, and suddenly everything feels strange and somehow uncomfortable. Third, the culture of expectations has changed. Previously, people lived according to the principle of you'll learn to love what you can endure. Today, all of us tend to have fairly high standards for a potential partner. People expect not merely cohabitation, but emotional closeness, psychological support, intellectual compatibility, shared values, physical attractiveness, and advanced sexual skills. Obviously, the more demands there are, the greater the probability that people will fail to align somewhere and eventually separate. Like the previous causes, social media and algorithms have radically changed the way we communicate. Previously, most contacts were tied to family, neighbours, classmates, fellow students, colleagues, and simply acquaintances whom one could physically see and touch. A person communicated primarily with those they regularly encountered in everyday life. Social media severs the connection between communication and physical presence. In theory, this should have reduced loneliness, because now we are all connected and can message each other or make a video call at any moment, but in practice the opposite happened. There are several reasons for this. First, a person constantly interacts with large numbers of people through views, likes, comments, and one-word posts. But this does not create stable emotional closeness. The result is that contact seems to have happened, yet at the same time it did not. Second, online communication has begun to displace offline communication. We correspond more and more and meet in the real world less and less often. This is a problem because, in purely evolutionary terms, we developed as offline social beings, not online ones. The brain experiences communication on the internet differently from communication in real life. I think everyone has felt this. Just know that you are not imagining it. Third, online interaction increases the likelihood of relationships breaking apart. To stop communicating with someone in the real world, you have to make quite a serious effort. If you have gone through a major conflict, then you know how difficult it is to completely sever ties with a person. Even if rationally you understand that you no longer need them, you might simply run into each other on the street, and then something has to be done. Simply walking past and completely ignoring the other person is almost impossible, both for them and for you. Online, everything is different. Just block or at the very least delete the messages. Of course, this makes relationships far more fragile. As you can see, everything is fairly bleak, but things are about to get even worse. Next time we will talk about why we are losing our minds, and we will draw extremely powerful conclusions from all 3 episodes, which will suddenly turn out to be parts of a single story. If you watch the previous episode and this one, then you have already felt it. It is only going to get better from here. Do not miss it.